Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. This is a brief video reviewing the film Punjab 1984, directed by Anurag Singh, starring Diljit Singh and Dosanjh and Kiran Kher, which has been released worldwide. In this video, we're going to give a brief introduction. We're going to go through some of the positives of the film, and there are some positives. Despite what you may have read on social media, there are some tremendous positives to this film. We'll also be looking at the negatives, and again, there's plenty of those too. And then we're also going to give you a brief conclusion. And I hope you stick around for the conclusion, because it's a conclusion that I didn't expect and probably you won't expect either. So I hope you stick around for the conclusion. Firstly and initially, any film that takes us on a journey and shows us what those mothers, those Lionheart mothers of Punjab went through when they lost their sons who were picked up in the middle of the night arbitrarily by security forces. Any film that gives us that journey and shows the raw emotions that those two, that mother and son, felt, needs applauding. However, any film that maligns our movement and sort of maligns the things that it stood for also needs challenging. So those are some of the things we're going to be challenging. But it's heartening to see that films about 84, about Jadasi and the Sikh genocide, are being released. There was a time when Punjabi cinema there was no Punjabi films coming out, and when they were coming out, nobody was watching them. We've seen the response to Sada Haqs, to Qaum De Heere, to latest films like this one, Punjab 1984, and it's heartening to see that cinema houses are filling up. But what can often be worrying for us is they are filling up, but what message are they coming out with? Because whether it's Desh Hoya Pardesh, Gurdas Man's film, or it's Hawaii Babu Man's film, there seems to be a common formula that runs throughout these films, and the formula is this. They will admit, each and every film would admit, just like the whole world, and nobody in the world can deny this, that Sikhs were killed in India from the 1980s onwards, and there was a big, massive killing. Nobody can deny this. These films depict that killing, so they keep the Sikh masses happy. But at the same time, in this formula, there's this small little footnote where they blame the Sikhs themselves for picking up weapons. This keeps the Indian establishment and the masses happy. Each film that I've mentioned has done exactly that. They've depicted the killing, they've depicted the brutality that the ordinary people of Punjab faced, but there's this horrible undertone that they themselves were to blame for it because their sons picked up weapons. Nobody really delves into the reason why they picked up weapons and actually fought for this concept called Khalistan. There was one film that was released many years ago, and it was called Marches, directed by Gulzar. This film was actually banned. This was the first film that depicted in a very raw, authentic way what happened to a normal armed Pindu village family when their world was thrust into hell because the Indian establishment decided that they were going to pick up their sons for no reason at all. Marches was the first film that done this. And then we come to hear that Punjab 1984 is going to be released. And knowing that Anurag Singh is going to be directing this movie automatically makes you think it's going to be a big production. Diljit Dosanjh, an international Punjabi superstar, Kiran Kher, a recognized actress with great acting credentials, who is also starring in this film. Already you can build a picture that it's going to be a big production, sharply written and meticulously delivered. However, some of the rumors before this movie was released, and some of the people that watched it at the premiere, had different ideas. They said that there were scenes of Sikhs, so-called Khalistanis, drinking alcohol. There were scenes of Khalistanis who were acting in criminal activity, who were engaging in criminal activity. There were Khalistanis who were pulling Hindus off buses and killing them at point-blank range. This, along with myself and many, many other people, thought about this film that, again, is this going to be a stylized, a slick version of the same old lies? That yes, Sikhs got killed, but they were to blame for it because they were killing Hindus and picking up weapons. However, after watching the film, I think I had a completely different view. Yes, those things need to be challenged, and we'll challenge them in a little while. But so let's look at some of the positives of the film. Before looking at the positives, it's worthy to note that we must be very wary of a film that's been passed by the Indian Censor Board without any issues. Most films that are passed by the Indian Censor Board, especially of a sensitive nature, normally are compatible with India's story. So it's worthy to note that. those that have seen it or those who are going to see it, it's worthy to note that this was passed by the Indian Censor Board and it wasn't banned, which means that some of the truth or a lot of the truth is going to be hidden from the public eye. Secondly, Diljit Dosanjh, the main protagonist in this film, recently was praising Badal and asking us Punjabi people to vote for Badal. Badal has been running a crooked kingdom that has been sucking on the blood of ordinary Punjabis for the past 4 decades. For a greater insight onto what Badal has done to the Qawm, check out one of our earlier videos and you can see what Badal has done. And this is Diljit Dosanjh who has praised this man. Kiran Kher ran on a BJP ticket for the elections. Again, that's something to take note of. PTC Punjabi, which is owned by Badal and his crooked kingdom, not only sponsored it, but is advertising Punjab 1984. These things should make us very wary of the film. Lastly, you look at who has passed this film. The BJP government passed this film. Why? There's a political football that is often played with the Sikh sentiments. They are willing to pass this film because it was the Congress party that was in charge for most of the genocide that took place. So they are willing to show Congress as a genocidal party, but they won't show you so much that might threaten India's national identity as a whole. So always be wary of this. Had Congress been in power, would they have passed this? That's something to ask yourself. And have the BJP passed this for their own agenda? Again, these things are just to be wary of. Let's look at the positives now. One of the major positives of this film was that the crew and the team and those people who acted in this film evidently took the film quite seriously. There was an undertone of tragedy throughout the film that completely kept the viewer gripped. Even people who know about this stuff, even people who have read about this stuff, would have their souls stirred by some of the things that they saw on the screen. It didn't look like a project that had been rushed for the 30th anniversary to capitalise on that momentous occasion. It looked like a film that they had taken their time. It looked like the film that they had put some heart and soul into it. And one of the major features of this film, one of the major positives, is some of the characterization. Kiran Kher, who I've already said before is an outstanding actress, played a mother that we can all relate to, played a mom that we all know, a happy, jubilant mom who had no greater pleasure but to cook roti for her son, who had no greater pleasure than to have her son's head in her laps and tell him stories at night and put him to bed. We all have got a mom like this, each and every one of us. She also plays a kind of mom, and we all know this mom as well, and we've all got a mom like this, who will stand at the curtain even if you're 1 minute late from when you said you'll be home, who would go to sleep and not sleep a wink until she heard your footsteps walk through the door. You yourself go out and you make sure with your friends, you go to the cinema, you go out drinking, whatever you do. But that mom is always waiting for you, and she's not going to sleep properly until you walk through the door. Kiran Kher plays that mom superbly. A mom that had nothing greater in her life than to look after her son and her family. We look at the Thanedar, the person who played the evil Thanedar, the depraved, drunkard Thanedar, who had, again, no greater pleasure than to ruin people's lives. He was a type of Thanedar that was depicted who would ruin people's lives, who would go into a family and he would take their sons, he would take their daughters, he would beat the mom mercilessly, but then he'd go to his own house and play happy families with his own family. Somebody who had no humanity. Perfectly played by this Thanedar. Another positive aspect in terms of characterization was the man who played the Thanedar, the drunken, devilish character who was brutalizing this one family, and he played it perfectly. You could pick any Thanedar from the 80s, 90s, or even some of the ones to this very day, and you could liken him to him. Somebody who's motivated by money, somebody who's motivated not by his moral obligation or his obligation to his duty, but motivated by money, motivated by brutality. He played it perfectly. And one of the major things that you could see in this film is that somebody who was in charge and responsible for law and order was in fact the person who was breaking it down. So that was a major plus point. The songs in the film, we didn't see any airy-fairy dances around trees. There was no lip-synced cheesy music or cheesy songs. They actually gave respect to the film, and all the songs were in the background, and they actually moved the story forward. They were heart-rending songs, and they weren't dancing around trees. There were no sexual innuendos. There was nothing cheesy. There was nothing that somebody could turn an eye to. It was everything that the movie needed to move it on. Each song had a story to tell, and it told it beautifully. That was another positive of the film. One of the biggest positives of this film, not just the fact that we went on a journey with a mother and son, was that in the end of the film, Diljit Dosanjh, the main protagonist, even though he gets his justice from the evil Thanedar, from his own personal villain in his own personal story, he is in turn shot dead by another police officer. And this is one of the major things of the film, is that even though some of these individuals who were turned into soldiers, were turned into militants, and had to fight a war they didn't want to be involved in, even if they got justice from their personal villains, the police officers and the army personnel who abducted their family, there was also thousands of other army personnel and police officers ready to put a bullet through them. So there was no happy ending. Even though he got his justice from his own villain, there were plenty of villains ready to take his life. And that was a major plus point of the film. And finally, one of the major positives, although there are other positives, there's only so many we can talk about. One of the major positives of this film was that at the end, rather than show you the credits of who acted and who produced and who directed the film, there were actually photos of real victims, of mothers holding photos of their deceased or missing sons, to show us that this hasn't stopped, that the legacy of this police brutality and the Sikh genocide that went on in the 80s and the 90s continues to this very day. And that was particularly poignant, and that was a great aspect of the film. Let's turn to some of the negatives. There are plenty, but we're just going to pick a few. The initial opening scene shows a man walking onto the Parkarma trying to get some water during Operation Blue Star. Now, whether they missed a trick on purpose or they just didn't think about it, or they didn't do their research, but it's widely assumed by many witness testimonies that by the time Sangat were being locked into rooms by the army, there was indiscriminate firing for a whole 3 or 4 days, or even 5 days. Relentless bombardment in a full-throttle military siege that had no let-up. This scene shows a man who's able to walk onto a Parkarma that should have been covered in blood, again, from witness testimonies and photos that we can see, that should have been completely broken, and a Sarovar, again, that should have been covered in blood, but was fine. The Parkarma was fine, and he enters a Parkarma and he's shot with precision bullets. This suggests that the military operation was quite precise. This suggests that the military operation was meticulous when it wasn't. Every witness testimony says that for a whole week, Harmandir Sahib was under such bombardment that people around the complex thought that Harmandir Sahib has been razed to the ground. So again, we shouldn't be under the misconception that Operation Blue Star was somehow a great plan, a systematic plan. It was a genocide, a full-throttle military siege on a non-military target, on full civilians. So this scene wasn't correct. Another negative of the film is automatically from the outset, we are told that there were terrorists at Harmandir Sahib. The police officer tells the protagonist that they were terrorists, and Diljit Dosanjh, the protagonist, says, "My father isn't a terrorist." Already, again, we're not saying that they have to or they should have looked at these things because it's been passed by the Indian Censor Board. What we are trying to do is make people wary who might go to watch the film or who have already seen the film, that already you're blaming them as terrorists. Again, like every other film, Hawaiian, that showed Babu Man's Hawaiian, which was released about 10 years ago, that showed harrowing scenes of the Delhi massacres that broke us all into pieces. But the initial opening scene was, why were weapons allowed to go to Harmandir Sahib? And this film was no different. This film was no different from the normal formula. In fact, it was even worse, because it was blatant, the formula. The first half took us on this heart-wrenching journey of a family, of a caring mother, of a cheeky son, of a stern but lovable dad, a family that's been ripped to shreds by the Indian establishment. But the second half takes a more sinister turn and starts to blame us for that genocide. Now, with this label of a terrorist, there's no delving into what happened before Operation Blue Star. This film is limited in scope. It's called Punjab 1984, but we need to be wary that before 1984, there were masses of injustices faced by the normal Punjabis. There's a human rights report that was written in 1983 that said Sikhs were arbitrarily arrested and Sikh women were tortured and raped in police custody. This was life in Punjab before 1984. So it's up to us to realise who the actual terrorists were. The people that were committing crimes, the police force that had turned into a criminalised gang to brutalise one group of people, or somebody like Sant Pindrawale who gave voice to this injustice. This is something that's been missing from the film, and this is something that we need to be careful of. This label of terrorist is an undercurrent that runs throughout this film. But it's this label of terrorist that needs challenging. Because a quick look into the history of India post-1947 points at a completely different terrorist. And then another negative, and an issue we come on to now, that has called for from many Sikh organisations to boycott this film, is the way Khalistan and Khalistanis have been presented. Even when the first Khalistani hits the screen, evil music is playing in the background. Already a subliminal message that this character isn't proper, isn't moral, and isn't just. This Khalistani can't talk normally, he has to shout, and he's constantly holding this gun. It's for us to look at and decipher that when Sikhs were fighting in the First World War or the Second World War, or they were fighting for India against Pakistan, we've always been lauded for our heroism, for our moral and just way of fighting, for our righteousness. We've won awards for it. Sikhs have been seen as gallant defenders of justice. So why on earth, when it came to our own freedom, in our own struggle, would our beliefs that are firmly rooted in Guru Gobind Singh's philosophy that when all peaceful means fail, it's right to pick up the sword of justice, why then would that go straight out the window? Why would these Khalistanis, why would this blood that's running through our veins that only fights against injustice and fights those perpetrators and does nothing to innocence, why would that suddenly change in the Khalistan movement? Why would Khalistanis suddenly become drinkers at night? Why would they suddenly become harassers of women? Why would they suddenly take Hindus off buses and kill them indiscriminately? This is one of the most disappointing aspects of the film. Knowing that this was going to be a full production, a massive production, knowing it was going to have so many stars, knowing that they were going to try and look at 1984 from a different angle, they started to regurgitate the same rubbish that we've been fed for the past 30 years. This was the biggest disappointment of the film. A major disappointment of the film. Khalistanis were shown not only as people who were pulling Hindus off buses and drinking at night, and angry red-blooded terrorists who had nothing better to do. They were shown as people who lacked ideology. They were shown as people who lacked thought. They were shown as people who lacked morality. Evidently, Diljit Dosanjh and Anurag Singh, they say that we'd done plenty of research for this film. What research did they do into the issue of Khalistan? There are people out there like Cynthia Kepley Mahmood and Ram Narayan Kumar who has produced a 600-page book on interviews with Khalistanis. Cynthia Kepley Mahmood has published a book on interviews with Khalistanis alone. And in both of these books and many others that have been published by these brave people who went into the pits of hell into Punjab to interview these Khalistanis, come up with the same thing, that they are normal people who want normal things. They want to be able to survive. They want to be able to live in a world without persecution. They're not robots. They're not grown in fields. They're not made in factories. They were created by circumstances. Khalistan wasn't a simple concept that came up by Sant Pindrawale and he ran with it and all this destruction happened because of it. Khalistan was created by the actions of the Indian establishment, not the other way around. Khalistan became a convenient way to divert attention away from civil demands. And this theme isn't picked up in the film. These Khalistanis are shown as red-blooded males who just want to go on a murderous rampage. Take a look at Sukha and Jinda. We've done a video on Sukha and Jinda's letter, on their letter alone. It's one of the most exquisitely written, poetic, deep letters you would ever read in your life. Look at people like Baba Manojal. Even though he was the head of the Pindrawale Tiger Force of Khalistan, he was the head of the Panthi Committee, he was the Jathedar of the Akal Takht at one time, but he used to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and serve langar to the Sangat, make it with his own hands. These are the real Khalistanis. Khalistanis like Avtar Singh Brahma, who, when villages used to get ransacked by the Indian security forces and Punjab armed police, used to go there and go onto a megaphone and say, "Here, Avtar Singh Brahma is here. If you want to do anything to anyone, do it to me." These are the real brave soldiers of Khalistan, not the ones depicted in this film. And what was the ideology? What is this film trying to suggest to us? That these young men were forced to pick up guns and stop when the bullets ran out or their luck ran out and they got shot dead? Or was there an actual ideology? Was there a thought process to what they were doing? Evidently, nobody had listened to the 4 or 5 decades of peaceful protests. So the only voice they had was the voice of the bullet. But was this bullet there to kill innocents? Was this bullet there to settle land disputes? Was this bullet there to settle personal scores? Or was it there to try and bring some honor back to people's lives? To give them a glimmer of hope? They didn't pick up these guns and carry on rampaging through Punjab until bullets or luck ran out. It was a response to state brutality and the need to create a space where they could feel safe. And this is what's missed in this film. Khalistanis were people like you and me. They had arms, they had legs, they had mouths, they weren't monsters. They had families, they had a mother, just like in that film, who had no greater pleasure but to cook for her son. They came from those families. But everything was taken away from them. And the little they had left, they had to defend. This was completely missed in the film. And how much would it have cost the producers of the film to go and speak to the Commissioner of Delhi Police, who had interaction with pure Khalistanis like Sukha and Jinda? What his views were on Sukha and Jinda, they're unreal. Why didn't they speak to the judge who sentenced Sukha and Jinda to death but still hangs their photos in his house? Why not show these Khalistanis? This thing about killing Hindus off buses is widely acknowledged that there was something called the Alam Sena and Black Cats around in the 80s and the 90s. And this is documented in Julio Ribeiro's book, Bullet for Bullet, who was the Director General of Punjab Police at the time. He himself admits in his book that we used criminalized people, criminalized gangs, and we let them free from our prisons on the condition that they grow a beard, they tie a bug, and they get loose in Punjab. They commit all kinds of heinous crimes and shout Khalistan Zindabad while they're doing it to defame the movement. It's widely assumed and it's widely acknowledged that these people were pulling Hindus from buses. These Black Cats and these Alam Sena. KP Gill, the Butcher of Punjab, also the Director General of Punjab, he admits that without the use of these criminals, we couldn't put an end to the Khalistan movement. Because it's these people that defamed the whole movement. And this isn't shown in the film. This isn't even sort of suggested in the film. That's something to think about. In any case, if so many Hindus were killed by Khalistanis, where are the remembrance rallies from these Hindus? Where are the protests from these Hindus to get justice for those that were killed by Khalistanis? We go to Hyde Park every year. There's protests all over the world because we got killed. If so many Hindus were killed in Punjab at the time by these so-called Khalistanis, where are the rallies? Where are the protests? Where is the investigation from the police? Do we ever hear of this investigation of mass murder of Hindus in Punjab? If it existed, why isn't it such a big deal today? Another misconception of Khalistan that's propagated through this film is that Khalistanis were robots who couldn't think for themselves. One of the things that I said in the film is that the two lads, they started thinking for themselves, so they no longer can be part of the movement. This was completely against the grain of what Khalistan was. Khalistan was born from the colleges of Punjab, from Ludhiana University, from Guru Nanak University. People like Professor Puller were professors. Their job was to impart knowledge and get students to think for themselves. It was those students that started going missing. It was those students that started joining the movement, the thinkers, the intellectuals. There were DSPs, SSPs, whose sole job it was to go into universities and kill as many students as they could because they didn't want an intellectual property to remain in the Khalistan movement. Look at free-thinking Khalistanis. Look at the one that you know today, Balwant Singh Rajoana. Look at his letters, they're dazzling. He's a poet, he's a free thinker. He talks about human rights for everybody in India, for everybody in the world. He talks about ethnic minorities. He talks about human rights violations in the same breath that he says Khalistan Zindabad. These are the true Khalistanis. These are the true free-spirited thinkers. Khalistan, people who believed in Khalistan as a concept, weren't robots. They weren't a gang. They were free-spirited soldiers of Guru Gobind Singh. And in any case, what people fail to realize is that Punjab is the worst place in the world, one of the worst places in the world, for a guerrilla militant movement. It's completely flat. There are no hills. There is nowhere to hide. The Khalistan movement should have been put a stop to, or should have been eradicated within months, especially with the might of the Indian Army based in Punjab. Yet the movement lasted for the best part of 10 years. Why did it last for 10 years? Because it had the support of the people of Punjab. It had the support of the masses. The masses were ready to support these Khalistanis, and that's why the movement was flourishing for 10 years. That's something also to remember. Much time in the film is spent dehumanizing Khalistanis, and it's not enough to say that in 2.5 hours they can't cover every angle, because there was plenty of opportunity to balance the film. Balance doesn't mean, yes, Sikhs got killed, but we blame them because they picked up weapons. Balance is showing that we ourselves don't view the Khalistan movement through rose-tinted glasses. We know there was a fringe element that used the movement for their own needs, for their own wants and for their own desires. We know the Khalistan movement was derailed. We know there was internal bickering between the Jathebandis, and that's testament with the fact that there was several Panthic committees. So we aren't trying to say that the Khalistan movement was completely and 100% pure from start to end, and still is. We are saying yes, mistakes were made and there are fringe elements. But it's not enough to show us as red-blooded terrorists when there was also this human aspect to it. That should also be told in this film. Another major flaw of this film was that they completely missed the victimization of the Sikh community. By that I mean, the main protagonist, Diljit's character, has a little land dispute with his neighbour, and the Thanedar gets involved. So because he's given some cheek or some lip to this Thanedar, the Thanedar has him in his eyes, and he says, yes, I'll use my powers and I'll take him to jail and I'll torture him. There's also a scene in the film where 3 of the people who've escaped, including Diljit's character and 2 others, Diljit says that my neighbour was trying to take my land and he brought the police officer to intimidate me and I gave him some lip, and here is where I am today. I'm out of home, I've escaped prison because of it. The second man says that I was arrested and I was beaten mercilessly because I used to write poems. The third says I was beaten mercilessly by the police because I fancied a girl and I sort of approached her and things went wrong. And from then, we were just tortured mercilessly. Where was the 4th person who said I was picked up just because I had a bug? Where was the person who said I was wearing a gatra and I was going to the Gurdwara and I got picked up? Where was the person who said I was just tilling my field and ploughing my field when I was picked up because I was reading Bani or listening to Kirtan? Because this is what life was like at the time. The problem with the film is that it turns into a personal vendetta. Diljit gives some gob to the Thanedar and the Thanedar destroys his life. And Diljit is after the Thanedar throughout the film. It becomes too personal. When in reality, the situation in Punjab was such that even Indira Gandhi, writing a letter, says that those Sikhs who wear the religious garb are the most dangerous. Army circulars that say terrorists are those who wear pag and have beards and have gatre. This is what life was like. There's an attorney, a barrister in that film, and Diljit Dosanjh's mom goes to see that barrister because he's somebody who deals with human rights, abuses and disappearances, custodial murders, custodial detentions, illegal detentions, and she goes to see him. What people fail to realize is even people like those went missing. A criminal attorney called Sardar Patti in Sangrur was dealing with over 300 human rights abuse cases. He was representing over 300. He was picked up by the police and nobody ever saw him again. Jaswant Singh Khalra, a person who uncovered mass illegal cremations of thousands of Sikhs, he himself went missing. The Jathedar of the Akal Takht, Our high priest in the 90s went missing. Nobody was safe. Yet in this film, everything seems too personalized. There isn't an atmosphere of terror in everyday life like there was. This is something that's missing from this film. The fact that it was Sikhs who were being picked up arbitrarily and being made to disappear. It was Sikhs who were facing false encounters. It was Sikhs who were facing extrajudicial killings. It was Sikhs that were facing custodial torture. And this is missing in this film. So this is a major criticism of the film. And I hope if Daljit or Anurag Singh is watching, who seem like they're from Sikh backgrounds or Sikh families, don't use a tagline, Punjab 1984, if you're not going to show or even suggest the victimization and the brutalization of one Qaum because of their appearance and their belief system. This is a major criticism of the film. It could easily have been called Jat de Jameen. It could easily have been called Thanedar to Badla, because it hasn't shown the victimization of our people. It's a very personalized story, and that's a major criticism of Punjab 1984. So just to conclude very briefly on this brief video, this film can be very dangerous. It had its positives. It certainly shook my soul. The first half did anyway. But it can be quite dangerous. And they can be dangerous because there's people out there with limited or no knowledge of pre, during or post 84. And for those people, they may be shook by the film. They may even have enough inspiration and motivation to help those victims. But they'll also leave the cinema hall with equal contempt for those defenders of the faith that we call Khalistanis. They will leave with contempt for those people who brought a glimmer to the downtrodden, a glimmer of hope to the downtrodden. That's why movies like this can be quite dangerous. And it's up to us to educate these people on what true Khalistanis were and what they stood for and what they continue to stand for, the few that are left. That's very important about this film. Another aspect we need to take into account is we have Sikhs, Punjabis out there who are completely resourceful. They've got many resources at their hand. There's intellectuals out there. There's people with expertise and knowledge and know-how. Why should we keep crying about these big screen films when we should really be making our own? Why are we spending money on adding bricks to our dwindling sangat in our gurdwara and not hitting the big screen where we're losing out the most? This is what's going to get people in. This is what's going to get the truth out. This is what people are watching. This is an arena we need to enter if we are going to get the truth out there. So those are two major points. But here's the real punch in the nose. And this is a conclusion that I didn't have in my head until I went to the cinema. After the film is finished and you're taken on this journey of a mother and son and how they've been separated and how they've been brutalized and how they come together, the tragedy, the harrowing scenes. But the most harrowing and gut-wrenching scene I saw when I went into that cinema hall wasn't on the big screen. It was after the big screen. It was in front of my very eyes. At the end of this film, as I mentioned earlier, instead of showing the credits of the people involved in the film, they show the real victims. They show those poor mothers like ours, holding onto photos of their children, and to this day, looking at the door, thinking that they're going to walk through it. That scene, that end scene showing those victims lasted 1 minute 55 seconds at the most. I saw 200 of my own so-called people, as soon as the film had finished and the victims' shots had come on, started exiting. Not a single person, bar 5 or 10 people, had the respect to look at the screen and those victims for another 2 minutes once the film had finished. Some of them were walking arm in arm, laughing after the film. Just doing their normal Shugul Mela, they've just seen another film as if it was Jat and Juliet. If they had sat in their seats and looked at those pictures for 2 minutes of the real victims, those children wouldn't come back. By them staying in their seats, those mothers wouldn't have had a sense of justice. But what does it say about our humanity? What does it say about us? The most gut-wrenching thing and the most shocking and disgusting thing I saw in that film was the people afterwards. We can curse the Indian establishment as much as we want for creating this genocide and these victims. But there's another guilty party. A guilty party that has forgotten these victims and doesn't care. And that guilty party can be found by looking in the mirror. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.